Hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you, everybody who's signed on. We have critical mass here, so I think we're going to get started. My name is Mike Kreisberg. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Abundant Housing, Massachusetts. Uh, Very happy again that you've all made it. We're going to be doing an overview of the draft regulations released by HLC as it relates to the accessory dwelling unit legalization, including the Affordable Homes Act. Before we get started, just want to say that we have a Q&A section here. So if you have questions, please put that into the Q&A section, and then we're going to answer it at the very end. Cheryl, who's also on, she's going to help kind of compile those answers or those questions, and then we'll deal with them at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so I'm sure everybody already knows this, but just want to set the framework here a little bit. How did we get here? So this summer, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Affordable Homes Act, and it was signed by Governor Healy, pictured right here. Abundant housing is somewhere in this room in the background, not pictured here, but we were in the room. And as part of that law, the state legalized accessory dwelling units by right. And that portion of the law goes into effect on February 2nd. And in addition to legalizing accessory dwelling units, the law, tasked the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to issue guidelines or promulgate regulations to administer this paragraph being the section that legalized accessory dwelling units. And so that's what we're going to go over today is the draft regulations that HLC has issued. And as I just mentioned, this paragraph that it's referring to is this section in particular right here. And I'm just going to read it out loud. So it says that no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit, unreasonably restrict, or require a special permit or other discretionary zoning approval for the use of land or structures for a single accessory dwelling unit or the rental thereof in a single-family residential zoning district. And so while there is somewhat clear what this means in the law, the regulations are going to attempt to further clarify that. And some of the aspects I just want to call out right now that we're really going to be zeroing in on in this presentation are what constitutes an unreasonable restriction, and then also what a single family residential zoning district is. So the regulations are broken up into four different sections here. Not going to go into each aspect of the regulations. While it might be nice to do that, they're a bit expansive. We don't have time to do that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the sections that we believe are the most important, and we're going to talk about like kind of AHMA's take on them. And as we're like going through this, I'm kind of going in the order of the regulations. But at the end, there's kind of two aspects that we're really going to focus in on as like AHMA's priority, uh, like our priority comments and what we think is most important for having this law actually turn into accessory dwelling units built across the state. So the four sections are a statement of purpose. This just kind of outlined generally that the purpose of the regulations is to implement or to guide municipalities in implementing the law, and that the purpose of the regulations are to encourage the development of accessory dwelling units. It's actually important. We'll kind of get into later on why that purpose at the beginning being to encourage ADU development plays into the regulations later. The second section is definitions, and we're going to go through a few of them. And the definitions are really important because as the regulations are written, how they define certain words actually has a really big impact on how the law is implemented. The third section, which is really, I guess, the meat of the regulations, is the regulation of protected use ADUs and single-family residential zoning districts. And then there's one final section at the end that has to do with basically data reporting requirements. We're not going to touch on those. It's kind of standard stuff there. But if you're curious, I do encourage you to go check it out. So the first definition that we're going to go over is a bus station, and how they being HLC, defines a bus station is a location serving as a point of embarkation for any bus operated by a transit authority And importantly, this is really critical for routes that allow flag stop locations. A flag stop is if you just on the street and you see like a bus stop, that's a flag stop. The entire route shall be considered a bus station. And why this is really important is because in the regulations or in the statute, excuse me, uh, there's no parking minimums can be imposed on ADUs that are built within a half mile of a transit station, and a bus station counts as a transit station. So according to this definition, every stop along a bus route is considered a bus station, and thus every lot within a half mile of that, if someone wants to build an ADU in that on their property on that lot in that half mile radius, then they do not have to provide a parking space for that. This is really critical because, parking spaces are expensive. They drive up the cost of construction. Sometimes there just isn't room to provide the parking space. So there's a lot of reasons why it can make it more difficult to build an ADU. There's also research that shows that people who live in accessory dwelling units are much less likely to own their own car anyways. So what we've seen in other parts of the country and other parts of the state where there are parking requirements for ADUs, they can actually be a significant deterrent to building an ADU. So we really support this definition of a bus station because it maximizes the number of lots within a half mile of transit. The second definition we're going to go over is a principal dwelling. Principal dwelling has to do with an accessory dwelling unit is accessory to the principal dwelling. What the principal dwelling definition does is it says that it's a structure, regardless of whether it conforms to zoning, that contains at least one dwelling unit. Again, we strongly support this definition of principal dwelling because the principal dwelling does not have to be a single family home. It could be a duplex, it could be a triple decker, it could be something even more. And we're really supportive of it because, again, it just further expands the possible lots where an ADU could be built. And that's kind of a theme that you'll see throughout the regulations is that HLC really took probably the most expansive definition possible for a lot of these areas to create the widest possible pool of potential lots where a homeowner could build an ADU. And, abundant housing, obviously the pro housing organization were very supportive of that approach. And so again, with the principal dwelling definition, we strongly support it and we're going to, lobby that it be maintained in the final regulations. The next definition I want to get into here is a protected use ADU. Protected use ADU, again, it's kind of straightforward, and in the law, there is a definition of an ADU, but the reason that we are focusing on this here is because it specifically says it can be an attached or detached ADU. The law, those in the Affordable Homes Act actually does not specify that an ADU can be attached or detached. So it's really important that the regulations clarify that a protected use ADU can be attached or detached from the principal dwelling unit. I think actually we see that most ADUs are detached anyways. And so when we're trying to encourage ADU production, ADU development, we definitely want to make sure that the most popular types are allowed by right. So again, we strongly support the definition that HLC has in their draft regulations, and we're going to push for that to be maintained. Okay, this is one of the most, I think, critical pieces of the law here. The law legalized accessory dwelling units, if we can recall from the first slide, in single-family residential zoning districts. And when that was initially passed, that people weren't sure, would that include zoning districts that are only allow single-family homes, so they're single-family exclusive zoning districts, or would they be single-family or any zoning district where single-family homes are allowed? And it's that second approach, the better approach that HLC took when defining a single-family residential zoning district. And so they say that that can mean any zoning district where single-family homes are permitted by right or permitted by special permit. So that could also, if for example, a commercial district also allows single-family homes by special permit, then someone could build an ADU in a commercial district. Again, I'm not sure how often that happens, but the regulations as they're written lay out that possibility. But where it's really impactful is for residential zoning districts that go beyond single-family homes exclusively, is that in any residential neighborhood now, a property owner can build an ADU. Again, we're, strongly in support of this definition here, and we're gonna in our public comments, and we hope in your public comments as well, we'll really push them to maintain that definition. All right, the last definition I'm going to go on here, we actually do have some critiques of HLCs. Not everything is a strong support, and so one of the last definitions they go into here is a use and occupancy restriction, and they define that as a regulation that limits the use or occupancy of a protected use ADU to individuals or households at a specified income or age. While we agree that there should be prohibitions on income and age, we also believe that needs to include family relations. This is something that you might see, in Massachusetts or other parts of the country where an ADU can only, there's a law that an ADU can only be rented to a family member. And again, that just further restricts the people that can rent it, further restricts the options that are available to renters. So we want to make sure that in an updated definition, familial relations are included in those list of prohibitions. And this is important because we'll get into this later on when we're talking about prohibited regulations. Use and occupancy restrictions are one of the prohibited regulations for ADUs. So we want to make sure that familiar relations are included in that list of prohibited use and occupancy restrictions. I know, that was a bit of a mouthful there. All right. Right on cue, prohibited regulations. So in the list of regulations, they divide it up into two different ways: prohibited regulations and unreasonable regulations. The prohibited regulations are mostly defined in statute, but not completely. So the first prohibited regulation is an owner occupancy requirement. As a reminder, that just means a regulation that says that the owner needs to live on the same lot as the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit. There's, a few reasons why we don't support owner occupancy requirements. We don't necessarily need to get into them now because that's not up for debate in the regulations that's defined in statute. That's not changing. The second piece here has to do with parking minimums. So I alluded to this earlier, but in the law, an ADU that's built within a half mile of transit does not need to provide a parking space. But if it's beyond a half mile of a transit station, there can be a maximum of a one parking space provided. Again, that doesn't mean that a municipality has to require a parking space, but a municipality has the option of requiring one parking space. And in the regulations, it says that the parking requirements can be satisfied by on or off-street parking spots. And this is a really kind of small change here, but we want to make sure that municipalities are not requiring off-street parking, because off-street parking, like in a driveway or in a backyard or somewhere on the lot, that can be pretty restrictive if the lot's already fairly small. If there's not, basically if there's not room for a parking space on the lot, and you can't satisfy it by providing a parking space off the street, can be really prohibitive. So that's a kind of a small change that we want to see there. For use and occupancy, just kind of talked about this. One of the prohibited regulations is a use and occupancy restriction. And we want to make sure that no municipality can pass a law saying that an ADU can only be rented to a family member of the owner. And then the last thing that is a prohibited regulation are unit caps and density. And specifically, we want to focus on the density restrictions. So right now in the regulations, municipalities would not be allowed to impose some sort of like density requirement. You might have seen this with like 3A, for example. There's 15 dwelling units per acre. Another density requirement that you might have heard of is called floor area ratio, FAR. Uh, According to the regulations, they are not, like, municipalities are not allowed to impose those on ADUs. And that's really important because a lot of times these density restriction standards are somewhat arbitrary, whether it's 15 dwelling units per acre, 10 dwelling units per acre, an FAR of 2 or an FAR of 1, it's somewhat arbitrary. And we don't want that to be a reason that an ADU couldn't be prohibited an AD because if there was a density requirement, let's say of a maximum of 10 dwelling units per acre, and that ADU pushed that lot over that calculation, we wouldn't want that to stop an ADU from being built. So that's already in the regulation, and we just want to make sure that that stays in there. Okay, moving on to the unreasonable regulations. And again, if you remember from the very beginning, that first paragraph, municipalities are not allowed to unreasonably regulate accessory dwelling units. There's a lot of room in there for what unreasonable means, and the regulations attempt to clarify that. The first piece that they do that for is with regards to design standards. And the standard that they have right now is that any design standard that would not be applied to a single family residential dwelling unit in a single family residential zoning district cannot be imposed, or if a design requirement is so restrictive, excessive, burdensome, or arbitrary that it renders infeasible the development of ADUs. And we support that definition. Think that's kind of a good way to go about it. Not too familiar with many design requirements that would be applied to a single family uh, home that would be excessively burdensome to a accessory dwelling unit. But if that's the case, the regulations kind of provide a pathway for a property owner to challenge that. So, we support this definition because it has some consistency with the single family residential zoning district. And if something is really egregious, there is a way to challenge that. I think another important thing that this hits on here is that it does just create consistency. A lot of times, what we hear from ADU developers is even if a regulation is somewhat silly or stupid, as long as you can kind of rely on that and address it from the very beginning, then it's not so bad. Okay. The next section here of unreasonable regulation is dimensional standards. And this is really important. This is where we think there's the greatest amount of change needed in the regulations released by HLC. So right now, the regulations say that any requirement concerning dimensional setbacks, lot size, lot coverage, open space, and the bulk and height of the structures that is more restrictive than what is required for a single family residential dwelling unit in the single family residential zoning district, uh, as long as it's the same as for a single family home, then it can be applied to an ADU. And this is really problematic and needs significant change. Basically, the reason for this is that a lot of single family homes are already overly regulated and have excessive setback, lot coverage, and minimum lot size requirements. uh, if a single family home is subject to a 15-foot setback or to lot coverage standards of 25%, and a lot coverage standard is basically just how much of a lot can be covered by buildings. So a lot of times, municipalities will want to set aside some open space for front lawn, back lawn, whatever, also for storm water runoff, but a lot of the lot coverage standards are really low. Like I said, 20%, 25%. And so if there's a single family home on the lot or another type of home on the lot, if a lot coverage standard would also be applied to an ADU, there just in many cases wouldn't be the room to build an ADU. So what we suggest is that, is that HLC basically provide a much more robust framework for what is a reasonable dimensional standard. We recommend 4 foot, a max of 4 foot setbacks. A setback is the distance from the property line to the building. We recommend 4 feet. That comes primarily from the ARP has a model ADU ordinance based off of best practices that they've seen from around the country, and 4 foot is what they've landed on as providing a decent amount of space between the adjacent lots and properties while also leaving sufficient room on the lot for an ADU to be built. The next thing that we ask for is to exempt ADUs from lot coverage standards or calculations. So when you're trying, if a property owner is trying to calculate how much of the lot is covered, an ADU would not count towards that. Recognize that that would be a pretty substantial change from what the regulations are asking. So we also kind of going to carve out a little bit of a caveat to that, is that if you can't get a total exemption from lot coverage standards for ADUs, then it's really critical that that lot coverage standards not apply on smaller lots, or at least have some sort of maximum. Because so what we're going to specify in our public comment here is that if you can't get all ADUs exempted from lot coverage standards, then lots of 10,000 square feet or less, I think the lot coverage standard should be capped at 50%. Again, this is just trying to get at that the biggest danger that ADUs face to overregulation is on smaller lots. And the excessive setbacks of 15, 20 feet, the excessive lot coverage standards of 20 to 25% are really, really constraining on smaller lots. And so we want to make sure that the regulations make space and protect homeowners' right as guaranteed by law to build an ADU, even if they live on a smaller lot. And then the last piece here has to do with minimum lot size requirements. Uh, pretty, most zoning districts have some sort of minimum lot size requirements, anywhere from 5,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet, and some places will even have 1 acre, 2 acre minimum lot sizes. And we want the regulations to specify that a ADU cannot be subject to a minimum lot size requirement, meaning that a municipality can't pass a law saying that you can only build an ADU if the lot is, for example, 10,000 square feet or more. So that is our stance overall on the dimensional standards. I recognize that there probably are going to be some few questions as it relates to that, and I'm looking forward to, diving into those at the end of the session. Okay, so the last comments we're going to get into here are not addressed that deeply in the regulations, but we think they're really important and should be added. And the biggest kind of area is related to non-conforming lots and structures. So a lot of Massachusetts lots do not conform to the base zoning of the town that they live in, or not that a lot lives, that that the lot exists in. There's a bunch of reasons for that. We don't need to get into the great downzoning of the 1970s, but you'll see for one reason or another, whether it be frontage or lot size or setbacks, the lot itself or the dwelling unit on the lot does not apply to the base zoning. And so we want to clarify that even if the lot does not conform to the base zoning, or that the ADU or that the principal dwelling does not conform to the base zoning, you can still build a ADU by right. That does not count as like a continuation or extension of the nonconformity. To get into planner speak a little bit there. Uh, Another aspect of this is that if an ADU is built within the footprint of an existing structure, then the ADU should still be permitted by right, even if the structure is non-conforming to the base zoning. Probably the easiest way to imagine this is if somebody has a shed in the backyard. Entirely possible that that shed is within the setback distance, or that shed pushes that lot over the lot coverage standard. We want to make sure that if you're building an ADU within the footprint of a structure that's already existing and is already not causing any problems, you should be able to do that by right. Then the last thing I'll mention here has to do with utility connections. This is something that you might see where municipalities require that an ADU have a separate utility hookup for water or sewer or its own septic system. I want the regulations to clarify the municipality cannot require that. These sort of requirements, really all they do is just make it more expensive and more difficult to build an ADU. A lot of that cost could be upfront, so it's both bad for anybody who wants to build an ADU, but it's also particularly bad for homeowners that don't have a ton of cash on hand and cannot kind of get those hookups and pay those fees. So it's really important that municipalities are not requiring separate utility connections. Okay. That was a lot of talking right there, a lot of talking at you. I just want to pull us back a little bit here. So as I mentioned, there are 4 different sections to the draft regulations. Within those 4 sections, there's several different items related to them. We did not cover all of them in this session here. Uh, and within the ones that we did cover, AHMA has a couple top priorities that we're really going to focus a lot of our public comment and a lot of our advocacy on, because we feel that these are the most important to ADU to seeing a massive uptick of ADUs built across the state. And so again, to reiterate, we really are going to hone in on the unreasonable dimensional regulations. Going to push hard for 4-foot setbacks, going to push hard for no minimum lot sizes, and we want to find either a total exemption or a partial exemption for ADUs from lot coverage standards. Then also the second main priority for us is that we want to maintain some of these key definitions. Uh, The bus station definition is fantastic. It makes it easier to build an ADUs without having to add in parking requirements. The principal dwelling definition, also great because it includes things beyond any type of dwelling unit, whether it's a single family home, a duplex, a triple decker, what have you. Protected use ADU again was important because it specifies attached and detached ADUs can be built by right. And then the big one, perhaps most importantly, defining a single family residential zoning district to include any zoning district where a single family home could be built. Again, all these definitions serve to do is expand the possible pool of lots that could build an ADU. Again, not everybody will do that, but if we start with as wide a base as possible, then it increases the chances of seeing a meaningful amount of ADUs built and making a meaningful dent into our housing shortage. So, and again, like, I'm sorry if I didn't mention this earlier. Again, these are draft regulations. There is, currently is a time to provide comment on those, and I'm going to get into that in the next step here. So what we hope we will do with this information is to submit public comment. As I mentioned, these are draft regulations. They have not been finalized yet. It started on December 20th and going up through January 10th, what is called the public comment period, in which members of the public, you all, us, get to submit our feedback on the regulations. And this is kind of like our last chance here to influence the outcome of the law. And so we hope that you'll take this information that we provided in the webinar and apply to your own public comments. We have created some resources for you if that is helpful. I'm going to hop out of the slide deck and actually go to our website and show you where those are located. So on our website here, if you go to, if you go to statewide ADU implementation, again, this is also where you can read the draft regulations. We have that posted here. And we have provided an individual public comment example, an affiliate group public comment example. For any of those on here are from our affiliate groups. We hope that you submit test or comment as a group and hopefully individually. But then we really encourage anybody to submit public comment here. And this is, again, you don't need to follow this exactly. Obviously, we actually really hope that you individualize this as much as possible and that you talk about some of the specific challenges that are fitting your town. But again, in this document, we've reiterated our position on some of the dimensional standards, reiterated our position on the key definitions, and also created some space again to talk about some of the other areas that we think are important. And on our website, you can actually find, and we'll post the slide deck too, you'll be able to find like basically Ahmed's take on each of those regulations as it's helpful to you. So once you have, again, prepared your public comment, the way that you can submit that, you can go through our website here or on Massachusetts, like mass.gov is where it actually lives. You can access it through our website or just go straight to their website. There is a public comment form here, again, where you can fill out your name and town and a section to either enter your comments in here or you can choose a file. You can do that at any time. And then also there's an option to give live testimony if you feel so inclined. Again, we're not asking that you do that. It's just if you want to, you can sign up to participate in the hearing, which will take place on January 10th. And you can do that either remotely or in person if you feel like making a trip to downtown Boston. And again, that's accessed on mass.gov's website. You would just enter your name, email address, whether you're testifying in person or virtually. And it's a really, really short, easy form. Again, to go back, just want to get back here. All right. Yeah, so we hope that you'll take the recording of this webinar, some of the information we provided, take our public comment example, make it your own, talk about issues that are specific to your town. If you feel so inclined, talk about some of the issues that we feel are really important. Whatever you do, it is really critical that you do submit public comment. I'm sure there's going to be lots of comments from individuals that want to make it harder to build an ADU. And we really need to make sure that the pro-housing voices are heard in this process. We want to make sure that HLC, the administration, knows that there are people in Massachusetts who do want to see more homes built, that do want to see ADUs in their community, and that are able to articulate and outline the best way to make that happen. So, again, I ask submit your public comment. Please do that before January 10th. Once January 10th is passed, you'll not be able to do that. And then again, if you feel so inclined, to share to others within your network. All right. And I'll end there just by throwing up our contact information, even though I assume that most of the people already have it here if you're able to register for the webinar. And then I think we can switch over to the Q&A section of the presentation.
All right, Mike, we have a couple questions for you in the chat here. The first question I'd like you to answer live would be, can a municipality limit the number of unrelated people in an ADU or in an ADU plus the principal dwelling unit?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, it's how many people can live in an ADU, and that is, basically established by other code. It's not dealt with in like the regulations. There's kind of a limit on to how many people can occupy a dwelling unit based on the number of bedrooms, and so that is already covered in state law and state regulation. And I think this is an important thing that we need to make sure that everyone's clear about is just because an ADU is allowed by right, it's still subject to all the other applicable codes and regulations that regulate the health and safety of people in Massachusetts. So again, that doesn't just because something can be built by right, it still must, receive a building inspection and still must, comply with fire code and building code. And that also applies to the number of people, whether they be relatives or not, that live in an ADU or the primary dwelling unit.
And I think specifically this person was asking about whether or not you had to be related to the person who owns the ADU.
Yeah, so right now, as the regulations allow it, I think it's possible the new municipality could require that, which is something that we don't want. We want to make sure that municipalities cannot limit ADU rentals to just family members. So in your public comments, want to make sure that that's clear. The question is about the number of unrelated people in an ADU. I guess I'm not sure about what you mean then. Yeah, again, I mean, I think that it's unclear in the regulations whether like that would be allowable. Oh, where my video just went. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's unclear like what in the regulations would it say that, but I would just kind of defer to what the code is as it relates to number of people in a dwelling unit, generally speaking.
Okay, next question. Can they impose FAR rules in multifamily units?
Uh, on the principal dwelling, they will be able to impose an FAR requirement, but that the ADU cannot count towards the FAR requirement as
Okay.
it's currently written. We want to make sure that that's maintained.
Sue would like she asked that question. I assume they would like to expand, so I'm going to give them the opportunity to do that real fast, if that's okay with you, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yes. Yes. Hi,
Hi,
Sue.
okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, so what we're trying to figure out is there are some multi-family properties on which individuals are looking to build an ADU, and all of these regulations are geared primarily towards single family. So can you speak on multifamily units or multifamily lots?
Yeah. So as it relates to FAR, just generally speaking.
Just generally speaking, like the regulations, how if they touch on multifamily at all.
Yeah. So if it's like there's a multifamily building on a lot and someone wants to build an ADU on it, the regulations they'd be subject to is separately in the zoning code, whatever would be applied to a single family home were it built on that lot would be applied to the ADU.
Okay.
I feel like that was a
Uh,
hesitant okay. If that didn't fully explain,
Well,
feel free
so
to
can I just, I guess, let me use an example. So we are trying to build one client is looking to build an ADU, but what the town is coming back and saying is it's not actually an accessory dwelling unit. It is you're adding new unit to a multifamily. Is that true, or are we actually doing can we do a detached accessory dwelling unit to a multifamily?
No, if these regulations, again, once they're finalized and take effect, and that won't be until February 2nd,
Mm-hmm.
if it's a detached or even attached accessory dwelling unit, it should be allowed to be built by right, even if it's on a multifamily property.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that was our question.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. And we are not attorneys, so we cannot give full fledged answers. Just want to say that. In towns where zoning has changed over time and many existing dwelling units do not conform to the current zoning, and therefore an ADU would not be allowed because it could not comply with underlying zoning, would you have to challenge the local bylaw that is unreasonable regulation?
Yes, I mean, so this is really a critical piece that is not addressed in the regulations that we need to clarify and push on, is that even if the principal dwelling is non-conforming or the lot that is on is non-conforming, then we need to make sure the municipality still allows that ADU to be built by right. If nothing changes with the draft regulations, I think it's entirely possible that a municipality would be able to stop an ADU that way. But if we can get that clarified in the regulations, then they would not be able to do that. So I think that's really an important piece that, like, when we're talking about public comment here, need to make sure. And I should also say that HLC is aware of this issue, and it's one of the things that they are really looking for feedback on. And so, as many of us can mention that and talk about the importance, how widespread non-conforming lots and non-conforming structures are in Massachusetts, and that should not prevent an ADU from being built. It's really critical that we talk about that and then we make sure that the final regulations do address it.
Thank you, Mike. Next question. Will HLC have authority to review and approve local municipal zoning developed to comply with the laws as it does with 3A?
Yeah, so again with 3A, I mean, I think that the Attorney General's office is going to, like, some enforcement is going to have to be up to the Attorney General's office in cracking down on bad actors. Like, it's not HLC's authority to do that. Like, the Attorney General's office would need to potentially bring suit, or private property owner. I mean, I think that's something that we are really concerned about, is that even after the law goes into effect and the regulations go into effect, municipalities are not clear with their residents about that. And a resident might just kind of take a municipality at their word. And so we're gonna have to do awareness about this new law and what is allowed and what is not allowed. But ultimately enforcement would or most likely will have to go through the courts. And I will say, like, I think that the Attorney General has made housing a priority. Is obviously, a lot of us know what's going on in, like, Milton and the suit that is brought there. And so I know that this issue is also very much on their radar, and I don't think they have, like, a formalized public strategy yet about how they're going to go on enforcement. But, you know, the law goes into effect February 2nd, and if a municipality and any law, like local bylaw that conflicts with the statute, is unenforceable.
I guess this leads into the next question here. It says currently in my town, Wellfleet, multiple ADUs are allowed by right as long as septic codes are met. Does this new regulation say anything about that? Would additional units still be permitted by right?
So what it says about septic regulations is like municipality could not impose anything that is more restrictive than was required by Title V of the Code of Massachusetts Regulations. That's what regulates septic. So the stance that HLC has taken is that the regulations that apply to a single family home as it relates to septic requirements are also going to apply to that ADU. So if a lot had like multiple ADUs, then they would just have to refer to what the septic regulations already are. And it's kind of beyond the scope of HLC to change that.
Okay, we're getting lots of questions here. I'm
Yeah,
trying to
no, I
flag them.
appreciate that. I can see
Uh,
in the box here how many we have. I appreciate all the questions that folks have asked, and please don't hesitate if my answer doesn't clarify your question to kind of reiterate and to rephrase.
and please raise your hand if you'd like to specify on a question. Um, I guess could you define, is this a statute or a proposed regulation, and give the backstory on how this is important to the affordability crisis, and what and how was it decided by the legislature?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Affordable Homes Act, the bill that was passed last August, which legalized accessory dwelling units, that is in statute. That is the law that says that no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit a accessory dwelling unit from being built by right. And there's also a couple other aspects to that definition there. Then the regulations that we just went over are draft regulations, so they're not finalized yet. But what they mainly aim to do is clarify the areas that are not clear in the statute, in the law. So there's a lot of questions, basically all the questions that you're asking right now that are not clear based on the actual text of the law. And so these draft regulations are attempting to clarify them. And between the end of the public comment period on January 10th and when the law goes into effect on February 2nd, HLC, at least according to what they have to say, is going to release finalized regulations at that point. And then once the regulations are finalized, the statute, like the part that's in the law, and then also the regulations will basically be treated as law.
Yeah,
And
this
how it
was
addresses the affordability crisis. I think we should obviously manage expectations. This one policy change is not going to single-handedly alleviate the housing crisis in Massachusetts, but it's an important piece of the toolkit here. It's an important tool that right now, like it's an important housing option that right now is not legal in many communities. And so by legalizing it, it just provides more home options for individuals. And providing more home options, building more homes will in the long run help to address our affordability crisis.
Thank you. This was Cynthia's question, and it
Mhm.
looks like they are raising their hand to talk. So I'm going to give them the floor.
Yeah.
I think you got to it at the end. So the simple answer is that there are no affordability restrictions on the ADUs as legislated. Is that correct?
That is correct. And also, it goes further than that, is that a municipality can actually not require an income restriction on an ADU.
Right, so they cannot require. And the last part of that is the other question I asked, if the moderator has it, just for clarity. Sorry about that. Let me just see here. Questions. My questions. Sorry. Oh, yes. If municipalities can limit ADUs to a related person, that sounds like another very, very big restriction that an anti-ADU town will initiate. Can this be stopped through the draft regulation process?
Yes. Short answer. It's not clarified right now, but we need to advocate for it to be included in the regulations. If the regulations do clarify that point, then a municipality would not be able to do that. But right now, that's not clear in the regulations. So we definitely need to raise that point.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was muted, sorry. Is
No,
there a
you're good.
square footage limit for the ADU and how is that determined?
Yeah, good question. So in the statute, in the law, there's a size restriction. So an ADU can be no bigger than half the gross square footage of the principal dwelling unit or 900 square feet, whichever is less. So in simpler terms, the maximum size that an ADU could be built by right as protected, by the draft regulations. If a municipality wants to go further, that's up to them, is 900 square feet.
Okay. What do you expect the timeline to be? Like, can most of homeowners who want to add to an ADU do so by right after the law goes into effect in February, or will they need to wait for the community update to revise their codes? How long will that realistically take, if so?
Yeah. So the February 2nd, short answer. So that's the effective date. And it is not like MBTA communities where a municipality needs to proactively update their zoning. On February 2nd, the law goes into effect, and any local regulation that conflicts with the law or conflicts with the regulations will be unenforceable. So you will not have to wait for a city or town to update their zoning. I will say,
Okay.
though, to add to that, that there's a lot of Springtown meetings, and I imagine a lot of municipalities will want to update their bylaws as it relates to ADUs. I know HLC is working on a model code for municipalities. But technically speaking, no, once February 2nd goes into effect, any local regulation that conflicts with the law or the regulation would not be able to be enforced.
So thinking about size of square footage, right? Waltham is attempting to implement a minimum size of 600 square feet. Is this addressed under the draft regulations?
It is not, but I imagine that would conflict with the statute, with the law, if the principal dwelling unit is if the principal dwelling unit is like small enough where the square footage of the ADU, say, would be less than 600 square feet, then I think that it could be challenged that way. Also say that I think there are minimum requirements in state building code or law that said how small a dwelling unit can be. So there's a bit of a floor there already in state law, but I think that a uh, minimum size requirement of 600 square feet would would and should be challenged and would not stand under the law.
People are rapid firing questions. We're getting to them as fast as we can,
Yeah, no,
folks.
no,
Thank
it's
you so much.
okay.
Okay, we have Corrine would like to raise their hand and answer a question if that's okay, Mike, with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. This question may be unique to smaller towns in Western Massachusetts, but my town, the city known as the town of Agawam, had a very low-income neighborhood in North Agawam. Over the past few years, speculators have been buying houses, quote, fixing them up, raising rents astronomically from what they were, and people are being displaced from the town, from the neighborhood and town, people who've lived here years and years. Is there any way to stop that in this?
Um, unfortunately, unfortunately, no, I don't believe so. I mean, this that's kind of like basically a broader issue that I know a lot of neighborhoods and communities and cities and towns across the state are facing. But I don't believe that in the regulations as it relates to accessory dwelling units, there's anything that HLC can necessarily do. to stop the speculation. I mean, I think at a macro level, broadly speaking, our position is that, we build more housing, then, the speculative investors will have less leverage and power to be able to jack up the rent, and people won't have options in their neighborhood to go to. So if we provide more affordable housing options like accessory dwelling units, then people might not get displaced because there will be further additional affordable homes in their community. But, kind of the broader problem that you are speaking to that is happening, I think is unfortunately kind of beyond the scope of these regulations.
Okay. We have a couple questions regarding some type of like comment period or annual review. So this is based upon this first question. Based on our experience with the planning board in Milton, I suggest AHMA consider adding to its comments that municipalities may not require annual or other periodic review of whether ADUs are compliant with the municipal zoning after they are legally built and occupied. What do you think about that? That was a mouthful. Let me know if I need to restate that
Yeah.
question.
Say, do you mind rephrasing? Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like this person is saying that Milton requires some type of annual review on whether or not ADUs are compliant within the zoning after they are built. What do you think about that? Should people add that to their comment or not?
So in the regulations, I mean, I don't want to say that. I mean, I don't think that like if an ADU is built in Milton after this point and it complies with the law and the regulations, then I think it should be allowed by right, and I'm not sure if there's anything that can go back and revoke that. We'll say that in the regulations there is a provision here that states that an ADU that already exists, uh, you cannot impose any prohibited regulations on it. So basically, if there's no kind of like revoking that or going back on like a built or provided ADU. Not sure if I'm fully answering the question here, but I'm not sure that that is necessary to be included in the requirements, but I would encourage if you're seeing that issue in Milton, then you as a resident there, as someone who's more familiar with the town, can speak to that, then I encourage you to do so.
And I may not have said that question properly, but the person who asked this question is raising their hand, so I'm going to allow them to talk.
Sounds good.
Thanks. I think this is coupled with restrictions involving family members, particularly whether people who are related. So, as I understand it, the planning board was considering imposing new restrictions on ADUs that would say that I mean, okay, you know maybe you can build it and occupy it, but you're going to have to prove annually that the people who are living there still meet the municipal requirements. And so I think that's something that other towns may seek to do, or Milton may seek to do. And I wondered if that's merits comment now in the public comment period to prohibit that kind of backdoor prohibition. It may be tied to what comes out of the final regulations with respect to related parties.
Yeah. I mean, so short answer to the question is yes. See that issue in your town, you should bring it up in public comment. I think it will depend a little bit on where we wind up with the use and occupancy restrictions. If family members do get added to that, unfortunately, if they don't, then I'm concerned that Milton and other towns would be able to impose such a requirement, including reporting of it, which is, another reason we don't want this. Like that's, I'm not sure how they would go about verifying that and money it would take to do that. But think if it does end up being a prohibited regulation, then Milton would not have the right to try to check such a thing. That answer your question, Jeff? Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now we have questions around the 900 square foot number, like why is that so? Where do you know where this 900 number came from? Why not allow 1,000, 1,200 square feet? Should we put that in the should we put that in our comments? Yes.
So the 900 square foot comes from the state law. That's the regulations can't do anything about that. The state law says that an accessory dwelling unit, by right, an accessory dwelling unit legalized under the statute can be either 900 square feet or half of the gross square footage of the principal dwelling unit, whichever is smaller. If so no, the regulations can't really do anything about that. I will say though that your local town can go beyond that and allow ADUs of a greater size. And so definitely encourage anybody in any town to, make their ADU regulations more expansive and easier to build than what is required by state law. I think that's something that probably should have mentioned earlier, is that nothing in state law prevents a municipality from going further and making it even easier to build ADUs. This is just the bare minimum. And so if wanted larger ADUs by right, it would need to go through a local town zoning ordinance.
Okay. Do you have a time and place for the ADU hearing on Friday, January 10th? I guess there's some confusion that it will be in person. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, it is in person, but you can also zoom in, and on the sign up form, which is on mass.gov, you can specify whether you'd like to be in person or not. I believe it starts at 10 a.m. on Friday, January 10th. And I'm not sure exactly what time it ends. And it's also located down in downtown Boston, like 100 Cambridge Street.
We have a couple questions about tiny homes or movable homes. So I'm gonna have Vera Struck. She would like to talk. I'm gonna open that up.
Good morning. This is really a great presentation. Sorry, I have a bad cough. I represent, as you know, thousands of people like myself who live in small, movable, tiny houses behind single-family dwellings. These tiny houses are privately owned by each person, each Massachusetts worker. They are detached. They are often skirted, tied down, wheels covered. I am quite concerned because in my own town, they've already restricted detached ADUs. They cannot be on trailers. They have to be on a secure foundation. The other issue is that they're claiming that they can decide whether attached or detached ADUs have to be owned by the property owner. So I'm just wondering, because after calling the Attorney General's office, they're claiming, hey, you need to write us about this and tell us which laws they're violating by restricting the ownership and or the type of foundation. This is regardless of the fact that movable tiny houses are not only all over the state, but they're being legalized in several states, as you know, across the US, and are already legal in 6 states, 6 cities in this state. And you know, I have a bill going again before the current legislature. So I'm just wondering, Mike, how I should direct these people to make their comments. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And thank you, Vera, for raising that. I think that basically this is something that could be addressed in the regulations that is currently not. So if the question is like, what should you address your members to do, I would say submit public comment, specifically mention that the regulation should cover movable tiny homes and prevent a municipality from, outright restricting it just because it is a movable tiny home and it is owned by somebody else. So I think, laying out the arguments that you have here and that we've emailed a little bit back and forth about, you are the expert on this. I'm definitely going to lean more on you for this, but I would, formulate that, ask for it to be included in the regulations. Because like you said, right now it's not addressed, and as long as it's not addressed in the law, it's not addressed in the regulations, then a municipality would be free to do it, assuming it doesn't violate any other laws that I'm not aware of. But if it were to be included in the regulations, then I assume that they wouldn't be able to do it, barring, again, not a future teller, don't know like if it could be challenged further on, but I think that in the public comments is the best place to raise that issue and to advocate for it to be included. So assuming that, answer your question, and, I know we're at 301 here. I appreciate, or 302, excuse me. Appreciate people sticking around. I have a feeling that there might be some more unanswered questions, which I'm really sorry that we were not able to get to them all. We'll say that we do have an info box and a contact box, and we check it. Actually, we do respond. So if you do have a question, please feel free to email us, whether that's about, the regulations, the statute, the public comment, any of the process, anything related to the ADUs here. We really strongly encourage you to like reach out to us, and because we want to make sure that your voice is heard, that your question is answered, and it's really important that there is a robust public comment back to HLC of people who believe in more homes, who want to see more homes in their communities. And so as best as we can support that and support you, that's what we're here to do. So Cheryl just dropped the info box in the chat. You can also go to our website and find that. And that's it. I wish I had a better ending line, but that's all. That's all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. This, as we said, has been recorded. We'll be sure to circulate it, posting the slides on our website. And yes, don't be a stranger. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and have a good rest of your day.